Right, so what do you get when you cross a desperate and genocidal Israeli prime minister, a reckless US president without the brains he was born with, and a nuclear research deal that has been kiboshed by attacks from both of them? Apparently, the recipe for global catastrophe. Benjamin Netanyahu wanted a distraction. He needed a distraction, and above all else needs to stay in power to avoid answering for his many, many crimes. Donald Trump might have just wanted a headline, but likely needed to keep his Zionist backers on side too. And now the Middle East is teetering on the edge of an oil-fueled inferno. Missiles flying, laws broken, and logic left for dead. You thought the 21st century couldn't get any more insane than buckle up, sunshine. Iran's patience is gone, Israel's arrogance is backfiring, and Trump, is he genuinely trying to start a war while still pretending to be a peacemaker? Or is he really in charge of his own foreign policy, given how high he's just jumped for Israel's interests? This isn't even foreign policy, really. It's geopolitical arson on full display for an increasingly desperate foreign state, and it could be about to cost the world far more than headlines and sound bites. Right, so as Iranian missiles rain down on Israel once again in the latest round of retaliatory strikes, becoming increasingly clear that Israel's provocation and Trump's illegal escalation have ushered in a new chapter of instability, danger, and recklessness. Iran's latest volley, all part of Operation True Promise 3, has shaken Israel once again and had people fleeing to the bunkers, so you'll probably only get into them if you're white. Dozens of missiles tore through Israeli airspace, with at least 27 Israelis wounded and residential buildings in Tel Aviv's Ramat Aviv district damaged. Among the missiles that have recently been used has been the debut of Iran's kiboshed, a multi-warhead weapon that represents a leap in cluster munitions technology. Unlike conventional cluster weaponry, which are largely outlawed actually due to the indiscriminacy of the damage they cause, each of the warheads in the kiboshed can be individually controlled for precise targeting, minimizing collateral damage, making sure each and every one of them ends up where it's meant to. Distinction Iran emphasized to contrast its tactics with Israel's carpet bombing of civilian neighborhoods as we've seen across much of Gaza. This latest escalation, of course, follows the orange oaf Donald Trump's illegal and unauthorized strike on Iran's nuclear research sites at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran described the attack as a barbaric breach of international law and a direct violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran is, of course, signed up to. And while Trump boasts of a successful strike, intelligence leaks suggest minimal damage has been done, particularly to the Fordow facility, despite 14 bunker busters being dropped on it. The cost of these munitions in the region of $7 billion all told, and for little effect. Fordow, being under a mountainside as it is, didn't really do a great deal, allegedly. In short, the attack was not only illegal and unsanctioned, it was completely and utterly strategically useless. Trump's actions have set off a chain reaction that now threatens US interests across the Middle East, and it's all on him. Arab states hosting American bases like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, panicking. They have declared states of emergency and placed their militaries on high alert, fearing that Iran might retaliate against the US presence in their countries. While Iran has thus far limited its retaliation to Israel, its warnings are ominous. It reserves the full right under international law to respond to those US strikes and has not ruled out direct action against American forces and those bases as a result. There's a strategic rationale to Iran's restraint on that front, in my view. By focusing retaliation on Israel, the proxy aggressor, the proxy for the US as they are, Iran avoids unifying American public opinion against itself when at the moment the American public are screaming at Trump. From all sides of the political divide, people are screaming at Trump. Striking a US base could shift domestic criticism of Trump's stupidity back towards Iran, though. So instead, Iran is leveraging global outrage, showcasing Israel and the US as aggressors while rallying regional sympathy and strengthening its deterrence capabilities. Criticism of Trump's illegal strike has poured in from around the world. Pakistan, Lebanon, Qatar, even France have condemned the action. The Pakistani Foreign Ministry issued a firm rebuke, stating that the US assault on Iran's nuclear facilities violates every standard of international law and affirms Iran's legitimate right to self-defense under the UN Charter. Oman joined in the condemnation, labeling the US aggression a breach of global legal norms and a destabilizing act that risks igniting a much broader conflict. Lebanon's President Joseph Aoun warned that targeting Iran's nuclear infrastructure has dangerously increased the threat to global security and stability. And Qatar echoed similar sentiments, denouncing both the US and Israeli assaults and urging an immediate cessation of hostilities in favor of a return to diplomacy and dialogue. Iran's foreign ministry called the strike outrageous and unforgivable and have accused the US of shredding the UN Charter in pursuit of Netanyahu's agenda. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi has been meeting with his British, French and German counterparts, discussing nuclear negotiations when that US attack occurred. Nuclear talks disrupted again, just as they were by Israel when indirect talks between Iran and the US were going on, underscoring the sheer hypocrisy of US and Israeli calls for diplomacy, when not once but twice they have literally disrupted diplomacy with missile strikes on Iran. Araghchi has also sent a letter to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, warning of an unprecedented collapse in international relations if such violations continue unpunished. Going through the motions, frankly, is all Guterres ever seems to do, is wring his hands and condemn, all while the US vetoes any action at the UN Security Council, Guterres never overruling, as there is a mechanism to do at the UN General Assembly. Despite this, Iran has now called for an emergency UN Security Council session to hold Israel and the US accountable, which might be worth watching just for the entertainment value alone, even if it is likely to get nowhere again, given the US's permanent seat on that Security Council and its veto power. But they would have to sit there and listen to every single word of it. Iran has not only responded militarily, but economically too. The Iranian parliament has just voted to close the Strait of Hormuz, which is a choke point for something like 20 to 30% of global oil movement. With Iran forming the entire northern coastline of this strait, closing it would send oil and gas prices skyrocketing worldwide. Under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, Iran has the right to do this if facing threats to its sovereignty and territorial integrity, especially following unprovoked military aggression. Provision reads that a state can block its coastal waters if it faces the threat or actual use of force against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of the coastal state. Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump have provided that. If the strait closes even partially, allowing only Iran-approved ships to pass, it would still be a seismic event in global trade and energy markets. Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, whose economies depend on open oil routes, now face a stark dilemma, and they know it as Gulf states' sphincters are twitching royally. Having supported the US and housed US forces, they may now watch their economies begin to teeter. Their military alerts and emergency declarations, something they never issued during Israel's genocide in Gaza, you will note, speaks volumes about their priorities, frankly. Well, now suddenly it's got real for them too. There is still a caveat in place here, though, in that the final decision rests with Iran's Supreme National Security Council as to whether the strait does actually get closed. But if it does, it'll be the first time this has happened since 1972, which marks the significance of the move that Iran are pushing here. Compounding the pressure on the shipping front, the Houthis of Yemen have now formally entered the conflict on Iran's side now too, declaring intent to disrupt Red Sea shipping once again and calling off their truce with the US. A statement they put out reading, "Our agreement with America was before this state's aggression against Iran. Today we stand with our brothers in Iran against America and the Zionist entity. Our military response is coming, and in the first phase we will target American forces in the Red Sea. We have a firm position to support resistance forces against aggression by Israel and the US. An attack on Iran is equivalent to aggression against Gaza and the entire Islamic nation." And we all know they match words with deeds, don't we? Donald Trump, however, delusional as he is, continues to frame his illegal strike on Iran as a success. Not only did it fail to destroy Iran's nuclear program, it emboldened Tehran and has given them the right to defend themselves against the US now, not just Israel. Iran's reiterated its commitment to peaceful nuclear research and emphasized that it has never sought nuclear weapons. But should deterrence require them, given how they have been treated, allies like Russia or China or Pakistan might step in. Russia having publicly mooted that Iran might be given a nuclear warhead. Therefore, they could end up having one soon, though they will never have developed it themselves. They would never have enriched the uranium to develop one themselves. I don't fancy it's a loophole that would necessarily work or go very far. But the fact remains, what the West say they don't want Iran to have, that they don't have, and have never wanted, is what they are arguably being driven to possess by Western actions, all for Israel. Let's shift for a moment from the military to the economic outlook here, because Iran, contrary to many prevailing mainstream narratives, are in much better economic shape than Israel is right now as well. Because for as much as military action will cost both sides, and as much as the prospect of closing the Gulf of Hormuz will hit Israel and its allies harder than Iran, who will still be able to conduct business through it, Iran are still, of course, heavily sanctioned. That said, over the last year, Iran has been strengthening its gold reserves, as this excerpt from Press TV explains the relevance of. Iranian Customs Office figures show that gold accounted for nearly 20%, or more than $8 billion worth of imports into Iran in the year to late March. The Central Bank of Iran, CBI, said in March that the country was among the top 5 gold-buying nations of the world, saying that the lender had converted some 20% of its reserves to gold. The surge in gold imports last calendar year came after the government cut import tariffs on the bullion to zero to boost the country's reserves and to facilitate the return of funds held in other countries because of US sanctions. They're finding a work around the sanctions, and the gold standard, of course, is still a thing. And this has given Iran's economy more resilience than anticipated, and a bit more stability going forwards, all despite ongoing sanctions and warfare. That isn't to dismiss the military side of things when it comes to Israel, however, as Iran are very much still leaving them reeling. In response to the US strikes, Iran have thus far chosen to take that out on their proxy, Israel, who Iran are still on the receiving end of attacks from, of course, and therefore still have a right to self-defense against too. The first time Iran has fired back-to-back waves of missiles at Israel, the double volley of Iranian missiles targeting not only Tel Aviv, but Ben Gurion Airport, that favourite target of the Houthis, and research facilities in addition to that as well. Israel's famed Iron Dome and David's Sling air defence systems once again struggled to intercept the wave of precision strikes. Civilian morale as a result continues to plummet. More are fleeing the country by boat. Infrastructure is crumbling, and Netanyahu, his war cabinet, and his mad government find themselves on the receiving end of growing discontent from their own people. For as much as Netanyahu is facing a reckoning, though, so is Donald Trump. His self-declared identity as a no-more wars president now lies in tatters. The man who campaigned on ending endless wars has just jump-started a fresh one with no UN approval, no congressional US approval or oversight, and no strategic gain made whatsoever. Critics have accused him of making the world a safe place for more war now, not peace, handing weapons manufacturers another golden age, while ordinary citizens face all the risks. Legal scholars and former diplomats are calling the attack patently illegal. It violated international law, it lacked congressional approval, and it bypassed every diplomatic channel available. The UN Charter, the NPT, and the US Constitution have all just been trampled by Trump. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has vowed further retaliation as well, beyond the calculations of the aggressors, is how they've put it. Already more than 40 missiles have struck Israeli targets, and the IRGC are claiming this is only the beginning. But Trump, ever the showman, together with ever the ignorant, has, having switched off to criticism, it seems, because his skin is far too thin for that business, is now hinting at regime change in Iran, repeating the insane Israeli sound bites now. So it really does make you wonder all the more, who is in charge in the US? Because this isn't American policy, it's Israeli policy, just being conducted with American jets and bombs and bullets, and no doubt American personnel who will be putting their lives on the line to do it, not in US interests, but in those of a foreign state. How is that patriotism? And it's driving a wedge through the Middle East too, between Gulf state rulers and their populations, between American citizens and their government, and between Western institutions and the international legal order. And the world is watching. The world is watching. Abbas Araghchi said those very words in his letter to Antonio Guterres. And he's right. And those words must be taken seriously too, not just by the UN, but by every nation that claims to uphold peace and sovereignty, and everyone who lives within them, in whose interest these governments are supposed to act, but which is becoming harder and harder to explain quite how. The erosion of international norms is not an abstract problem here, it's a road to perpetual war. We can all see it. If the US and Israel can attack at will and never get held to account for it, then the entire framework of global diplomacy is reduced to as much rubble as much of Gaza and parts of Tehran and Tel Aviv have been. This is not just a regional conflict. We can't look at it just in those terms. This is actually a referendum on the future of international order. Will might continue to make right, or will global institutions finally push back against this lawless dissent? Which way would you vote in such a referendum, I wonder? If nothing is done, then what Trump and Netanyahu have ignited will not remain confined to Iran and Israel. It will engulf allies, economies, and civilians worldwide. It already is. It'll just spread. Law or chaos, peace or escalation, sovereignty or subjugation. That's the choice before all of us, burning brightly in the missile-lit skies over Tel Aviv or Tehran with missiles flying in both directions. The implications for global stability can't go ignored. Can't keep ignoring it. While Israel reels under the consequences of its own aggression and the US tiptoes around the legal and political ramifications of Trump's unsanctioned pea-brained actions, the broader international community now stands at a critical point here. If Iran continues to escalate and the Strait of Hormuz is shut, oil-dependent nations, particularly in Europe and America, will face severe energy crises. Asia less likely to suffer, I would think. Iran supply a lot of them, after all. But with global shipping routes destabilised, not just the Strait of Hormuz, but also the Red Sea as well, if the Houthis get particularly involved in a lot more shipping blockades, insurance costs will then obviously skyrocket, consumer prices will knock on and then surge. The economic ripple effect of a single US president's decision could end up making the 2008 global financial crash look like a burp. We know how it'll go, though, don't we? Western leaders who remain silent during Israel's genocidal war on Gaza will squirm as their own energy security is jeopardized. Here in the UK, we could always return to that conversation of renationalizing our energy to keep costs down, but we also know what happened last time they surged, don't we? As the government blamed Russia for high prices and their war in Ukraine. And what they did was just subsidize the energy companies at public expense, and our bills went up to eye-watering levels. This has the potential to be far worse than that. Gulf monarchies too, who turned a blind eye to Israel's crimes, are now forced into action, not because of humanitarian concern, because their oil exports and economic stability are under threat. The scramble to protect their interests further exposes the moral bankruptcy of a region whose governments often speak of Islamic solidarity, but end up acting in pure self-interest instead. What is also becoming clear is the sheer futility of attempting to isolate Iran. Every strike, every assassination of a scientist, every sanction has not cowed the country at all. It's emboldened it, united it. Rather than isolate Iran, US and Israeli aggression is forcing regional realignment here. Iran's position as a regional power seems to be being solidified, not just by military defiance, but by diplomatic competence, in stark contrast to the idiocy of Trump and the mind-numbing slavish loyalty to Israel, the instigator by so many others. Araghchi's outreach to Europe, despite the aggression, underscores Tehran's attempt to present itself as the adult in the room, even knowingly going into talks with three nations he knew were all avowedly pro-Israel. One particularly overlooked aspect is Iran's evolving deterrence strategy. Beyond missiles and economic levers, Iran is also investing in narrative warfare, public diplomacy, international lawfare, and media exposure. By highlighting the contrast between their precision strikes and Israel's indiscriminate bombings, Iran is attempting to win hearts and minds in a world where the mainstream media is less able to keep us in the West dumbed down to the realities of situations, not just in that region, but globally. Furthermore, Trump's aggression has sparked renewed interest in the legal architecture of war itself. UN scholars and international jurists are now debating the effectiveness of current legal norms when permanent members of the Security Council can break them with impunity. This raises the question, though, if the UN cannot hold its own members accountable, what legitimacy does it ever hold in maintaining peace? It's a reckoning the UN is sorely overdue, and reform is crying out to be made. So in this vacuum of accountability, grassroots movements, independent media, and civil society are playing a bigger role than ever before. Protests have erupted in multiple Western cities, demanding accountability for Trump's actions and calling for an end to US support for Israeli aggression. With more people connecting the dots between militarism abroad and economic hardship at home, the anti-war movement may be witnessing a renaissance. Perhaps more critically, Trump's actions have unintentionally opened the debate about who truly controls American foreign policy. His alignment with Netanyahu's talking points, his overt hinting at regime change, and his disregard for Congress have left many Americans wondering, is US policy shaped in Washington these days or Tel Aviv? At this point in time, though, the fallout from the US and Israeli attacks on Iran is far from over, and there are a lot of unknowns going forwards. Iran's measured but escalating response, the regional alignment in its favor, the economic consequences for global markets, and the growing backlash against Trump and Netanyahu have created a perfect storm. As the world watches and waits, one thing is quite clear, though, that this isn't just a geopolitical flare-up. It is a crisis of global order. It's spreading. This is a bigger problem than just one for the Middle East. If unchecked, it may not only reshape the Middle East, but the principles on which international peace itself was supposed to rest, and it could, of course, expand from there. What the world needs most of all right now is to respond, not with more bombs, but with bold diplomacy, legal accountability, and public demands of a reckoning for all the architects of this disaster and those who have supported them. For more on the immediate response by Iran to the US strikes on them, hitting back hard, not phased at all, seemingly, do check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping support the channel at the very same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Yes, folks.